everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the night we have been waiting for. I hope you guys are excited. Please get in the chat and please get active. My name is Mike Harts. I'm the managing director at the Memo LLC. I'm the youngest brother of Minda Harts, the one and only Minda Harts. And we want to welcome you to the pre-launch book event for Minda's book out tomorrow, Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace. We're so excited to celebrate with you all tonight. And I want you to remember one thing, the hashtag is hashtag Right Within, hashtag Right Within. So please, when you post anything to any social media tonight with the book related questions or things like that, we want you to use that hashtag so we can get some visibility to this awesome, amazing book. We have some special guests tonight. We can't wait to kick off our launch party. And without further ado, let's bring out the two-time author, the one and only Minda Harts. But first, I want to show some virtual love in our chat. Please get active. I see we got some of our usuals in the chat. We've got family. We're all family. Once you've been a part of the Memo for a while, you're family. And we want to just welcome to the stage Minda Harts without further ado. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael. You look great. Thank you. Happy to have you here with me tonight. Happy to have all of you here tonight. I couldn't do this without you. I know that you heard me say it 100 times, and I'll say it 1,000 more times. Success is not a solo sport, and I wouldn't be here with a second book if it wasn't for you all. In honor of our pre-launch tonight, I'm rocking Lauryn Hill, How You Gonna Win If You Ain't Right Within shirt, so it's very important that we have that. Make sure that you share this with others. Before we get started, I'm going to be in a great conversation with Erica Joy Baker, formerly Baker. Now she is married, Estrella, I think I might have said that right. And I'm a big fan of her, so it's an honor for her to be here with me tonight to have this conversation. You all connect with each other in the chat and share. But so right now, I'm gonna give you a sneak peek. The book comes out tomorrow, but I'm gonna read 2 passages to you all just to give you that little Sam's Club sample so you can have that there. So here we go. This comes from the preface, and so I'm going to read from there. I couldn't stop thinking about Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and Cynthia Hurd. Breonna Taylor, Sandra Bland, and Cynthia Hurd had a few things in common. They were all Black women. They all died due to systemic racism, and they were all Black women in the workplace. It has been said that Breonna Taylor had sticky notes around her apartment with the goals she planned to accomplish that year and in the years to come. I don't know about you, but I have sticky notes all over my office with some of the same goals. I began to think about these women, their dreams, their goals, and even their fears. In those moments, I realized that racism doesn't just kill people, it kills careers too. Breonna and Cynthia each had a career, while Sandra was about to start a new one. And just to be clear, I'm not equating murder with the racial assaults that happen inside the workplace. What I'm saying is workplace injustices hurt too. It is damaging to know that if you had been a different color, your life or career might have mattered more. I began to think about the many times racism tried to kill my career and how heavy I felt during those times in my life. The times when I wasn't sure if I could make it through the workday because a manager did something racially inappropriate, but I was the one who supposedly took it the wrong way. I mean, what other way am I supposed to take comments that start with you people? After building my career for over 15 years, there were days when I wasn't sure how much longer I would last being the only Black woman in the office. Being the only is more emotionally taxing than the dominant majority will ever know. And eventually, it leaves many of us not feeling right within. This led me to start to investigate the importance of being right within and learning how to pack a little lighter. Too often, workplace burdens will other you in some way, shape, or form. And while you can't control everything, you can center yourself and find ways to heal. Even in those moments when I felt like crying and throwing the covers over my head because I was so overwhelmed by all the trauma all around me, I started to find joy in exploring what healing could look like for women of color. I started to explore the consequences of not taking time to heal from racialized trauma. Many of us have experienced so much of this trauma in the workplace that In order to function, we desperately needed to lock away and forget those memories. And some of us are reminded of those traumas every day because we work in an environment that won't allow us to live our best lives. You know, those environments that extend more grace to the person doing the harm than to the person who has been harmed. The reason for healing and becoming right within is not to benefit corporate America, academia, or your nonprofit organization. Healing is for us. So that's one piece. Just to give you another sample, I have another part of that I want to read to you, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. Hope you're using the hashtag right within. This chapter is chapter 2. It's called I Can't Give Up Now. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. This section is called My Why. While I was on book tour for my first book, The Memo, I met thousands of Black women and other women of color who appeared to still be grappling with many of their past and current workplace broken hearts. In my first book, I posed the question in the chapter called The Ugly Truth. Where do the broken hearts of women of color go when we can't take it any longer? That was the most quoted line from city to city via email and social media. After the first 10 cities, I realized there were reoccurring issues, unaddressed racial workplace trauma, and the need for its recognition and the lack of models for healing. Too often, healing had not yet taken place. We hadn't even allowed ourselves time to heal, or perhaps we didn't even know we needed to heal, and therefore found it challenging to understand what it could look like. Many of us carry workplace baggage from job to job and position to position, which ultimately prevents us from adequately securing our seat at the table. And some of us are currently working in toxic environments that seem to prevent us from being able to heal because we are triggered daily by the pain and the people who cause it. I know from personal experience that even if you change jobs, even if you move across the country, you can't keep avoiding your past. If you don't face the trauma head on, it's just another bag you have to carry that you were never supposed to pick up in the first place. I believe as women of color, we have to heal from workplace trauma because our health and wellness depend on it. Not to mention, it becomes a heavy load to bear, and it's not our job to carry 400 plus years of racial oppression. It's time we gather our tools to pack lighter and learn how to be right within because our ancestors are begging us to. They had so many racialized bags that they were forced to carry that the stress alone killed many of them. We have the opportunity to turn our trauma into the most significant advantage, freedom. Audre Lorde said, when we dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. Healing can be scary, but we must be willing to push aside our caution and see how powerful we can be as women of color with all that extra stuff weighing us down. So you are the first people to kind of hear some of this stuff. Curious what that's bringing up for you. Definitely put it in the chat. But now with that Sam Club sample, I'm going to bring my friend Erica to the stage. How are you?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
Yes, everybody's in the chat blowing it up. Thank you all on the platforms that you're on. Erica, tell everybody a little bit about you, and then we'll just jump into having a really important conversation.
Yeah, so my name is Erica Joy Estrella, formerly Baker, as Minda mentioned. I just got married earlier this year. I am currently the Chief Technology Officer at the DCCC with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. But before that, I was working at GitHub and Microsoft, Slack, Patreon, Google, just a number of tech companies. And, you know, became somewhat well known for being willing to talk about what I experienced at those companies in a really open manner. People weren't used to it. They're just like, well, diversity is good, period. It's like, yes, but you have to do the inclusion work and all the other stuff that comes along with it. And so talking about how, you know, being the only, because a company is focusing only on diversity, but not the inclusion work, is sort of what people know me for. And so I'm really excited to get the chance to talk with you, Minda, about your book, because I think it touches right on that.
Absolutely. And I heard you speak for the first time maybe about 7 years ago. And I'm like, she's a truth teller. I love that. You know, as you said, you weren't seeing a lot of that. And I'm like, she looks like me. She's telling the truth, you know. And I feel like part of our healing is being those truth tellers. So thank you for being here so that we could talk about our truths.
Yeah, happy to. And really just excited to talk with you about the book. The term racial trauma is not one I've heard before used with when it comes to the workplace. So I'm really interested in what examples of racial trauma you were thinking about when you wrote that.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about racial trauma in that way either, or trauma really, because I think many of us, we enter into the workplace and that's just the way it is, right? If you're black or brown or, someone that feels like they're on the margins, you're like, well, this is just how it's going to be. You're going to experience racism. So you just prepare, you put your armor on, you're like, this is the deal, right? So,
Truth.
so you haven't even considered what a good workplace could feel like because you're already ready for I think about it like from the horror films, you pick up the phone and it's somebody in the house and you just never know in the job, right? It could come at any time. And I just started to normalize that. And I didn't think about the trauma. But when I started to peel back the layers, it started to affect how I show up in other spaces, right? Because yes, someone calling you the wrong Black person or butchering your name or touching your hair, all the things that we have as promotions. And Dr. Martin Luther King said racism distorts the personality, and it started to distort who I was. And I realized that, just like any other form of discrimination, racial discrimination causes trauma, right? And I just started to unpack that, and I realized we need to talk about it, but I didn't know how to articulate it, right? What about you? I'm curious your thoughts.
I hadn't heard that phrase before, and thinking about it when it comes to my history, just in the workplace, it's just like, yeah, it was absolutely trauma that I was going through. I am a big proponent of therapy, and I have been in therapy for a long time, and that's how I, came to the place where I felt comfortable talking about my experiences, and thinking about that and the use of the term trauma, like that makes a lot of sense to me now. Like I hadn't put those things together before. But it makes a whole lot of sense. Like it is absolutely trauma, and we're getting re-traumatized every time we experience more microaggressions, macroaggressions. Just every time someone touches your hair or confuses you for someone else, or says, like you mentioned before, "You people," right? Like they expect you to just take that, but that's like pain that they're inflicting on you every time it happens, right? And so it's absolutely trauma, and it makes a whole lot of sense. I'm glad you put it that way. Can I ask another question?
Actually, I have something else I want to add to that is,
oh yeah,
I think the part, and it spurred something that you said, is that, we just accept it, right? And it's something that, again, that normalization of the trauma. Oh, this is how we're treated, right? They don't mean any harm. We tell ourselves these stories so that we can make it through the workday. But again, why should we have to carry that with us each and every day?
Well, I find that we're told that they don't mean any harm, right? Like we're told to think in that way so that we have to like take, just take the pain, take the trauma, because there's that phrase, what do people say? Assume best intentions, assume best intent. It's just like, okay, I can do that, but that doesn't result in any work happening on the part of the person who harmed me, right? Because they have inflicted harm, they have inflicted pain. And so like me assuming best intentions doesn't do anything to resolve the pain that I've just experienced, right?
Yep.
I think that's something that folks don't really think much about when they use that term.
Absolutely.
You talk about healing and freedom for women of color in the workplace. What does that look like? Because I don't know that I have healed in the workplace, so I'm wondering what that looks like for you.
Yeah, one thing I found about healing is it's definitely not, at least not in my case. I couldn't just put in the microwave and boom, your girl is healed, right?
Right, listen.
It's a daily practice, and healing is not a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. But what I realized where my freedom lies is acknowledging that this 15 years of being one of the only or the only, it caused me pain. Right. And for so long, I didn't even want to acknowledge that these things were racist. Right. It was like a bad thing for me to say, oh, they're being racist. Right. Because, again, we've been conditioned that, no, that's not what it is. We don't want to believe that that's what it is. And so I didn't know what freedom felt like because I was under the constraints of systemic racism. Right. And so the definition of freedom is no longer feeling confined. And I was able to first start to feel free when I acknowledged that this wasn't okay, that I deserve better than mediocre workplaces, right? If my colleague can thrive, why can't I? Why shouldn't I be able to have that same humanity, dignity, and equity? And I realized that my freedom lied in me acknowledging that this pain was being caused, and hoping that if I start to tell the truth, that maybe others will feel encouraged and inspired and empowered to do the same. And for me, I felt like we deserve that freedom, right? Our ancestors, those that came before us, they fought so much. We are beneficiaries of the freedom that they left us. So what are we going to leave the next generation, right? So it's imperative that not only I find my freedom, but we break the generational trauma curses so that we don't pass that on to others. So I realized that healing isn't just for me, it's for the collective. And that's why I'm constantly finding that freedom.
Yeah. The trauma you mentioned that we're dealing with and healing from the trauma. I find it, for me, like in my personal world, just really difficult to heal from a trauma when it's constantly ongoing, right? Like it's hard to get to a place of healing when I'm experiencing that trauma over and over and over again. And I wonder how leaders can create a work environment that helps with that healing versus re-traumatizing and traumatizing over and over and over again. Like how can, I'm a leader in a workplace, right? Like what things do you think I could do to sort of ensure that the people who work with me and on my teams aren't experiencing that trauma again and again?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we can do all the healing, right? But our workplaces have to create the guardrails, the psychological safety, so that we're not constantly re-traumatized.
Yes.
In the book, I talk about several horrible toxic managers, but one thing I was hopeful that my managers would do is take away the barriers instead of create more, right? And every time they created more, I was re-traumatized, and my healing then became fragile, right? And I realized that I'm not going to let their ignorance or racism stop me from my healing path. And what I found is that part of that is having those conversations with them, right? In my former life, early on, I didn't think I had the agency, Erica, to tell my manager that this isn't okay, right? You might not have intended harm, but it caused harm, right? And in order for me to be successful, this is what I need from you. Can you support me on this? And I think sometimes we just don't have those conversations. I think right now we talk about courageous conversations, but I'm hoping that these conversations are so normalized that they're no longer courageous. That's just part of our workplace culture, right? And so one of the things that I have in the new book is a manager's pledge, a leader's pledge. I'm asking every leader to commit to equity. Even when you make a mistake, you will get back up and you will commit to making the workplace work for everybody. But you first have to acknowledge that you do have bias. I think a lot of our leaders who don't look like us tend to say, well, that's not who I am. But it's like two things can be true at the same time. You may not be experiencing this in the workplace, but somebody else is. So what are you going to do to make it safer for us? Right. And you're not going to know how to do that unless you're a courageous listener. So when I do come to you and tell you that this is traumatizing or it's causing me pain, that you take your ego out of it, right? And say, wow, let me create that space so that Minda and Erica can come to me or have a conversation, because that wasn't my intention, but it still caused the harm. And I think if we start to hold people accountable, that requires HR as well, right? To partner and say, why is it that when these things are happening, people of color are always leaving, but the perpetrators, they're still staying and traumatizing people, right? So what would it look like if we normalize that maybe they don't belong instead of us always feeling like we do? Don't.
Right. To that point of, talking to leaders, getting them to have those courageous conversations, how have you found it possible, or like what tricks, tips do you have for getting people, especially leaders who don't look like us, out of that place of defense where it's easy to re-traumatize and get them to that place of courage and like, yes, I can make a mistake, and it is, I'm a human being, I'm able to make mistakes, and also I'm going to acknowledge it and get better. Like, how have you found it, or I guess what ways have you found to get people to get to that place?
Yeah, one way that I encourage companies that I consult for is conflict resolution training, because I think a lot of our managers, and I know once upon a time when I was in my former life, I was thrusted into a role. Right now you have a team. I did really great on paper, but I had never been a people manager before. So I'm sure there were things that I said that were not, I didn't intend harm, but I still might have caused it, right? But I still was trying to create that space to where my colleagues would at least feel comfortable addressing me. And I think that's the part of the conversation that I'm hopeful that our managers get the tools from leadership and talent development so that they understand how to engage in effective communication, right? And I think that that's the issue, is that we make it about ourselves. And so the first thing is asking leaders to have courage, right? Because nobody benefits when you constantly are cautious. Now, part of the harm, I've come to you, which is courageous, and now you're re-traumatizing me by telling me that I got it wrong, this, that, and the other. So I think it's basically having those conversations first and foremost, and then making sure that our managers have the tools to be able to respond. Because I think a lot of our managers do not know how to manage talent, period, but then diverse talent on top of it. And so what tools do they need? And going back to the manager's pledge is committing to daily practices of equity, because it's not enough for you to see yourself So for example, when I've been on teams, I'm the only Black woman. So my manager would often see himself in the people who looked like him, right? Oh, you remind me of my younger self. I never got that. So when I did come and have a conversation, don't make it about race, this, that, and the other, always met with that. And I think now we're in a different time period where we can actually make it about race, because that's what it is, right? And
that's what it's about, right?
That's what it's about. And I think we do have an open door. 2020 has kind of cracked that open so that we can have more conversations without being as fearful as we once were. But just like any relationship, Erica, if we don't tell people what our love languages are, what we need to be successful, how to manage us, that's part of managing up, then I think that it can be a missed opportunity. But if you are met with backlash, still document, because no one could ever say that you didn't tell them what you needed. But I'm curious your thoughts as a leader.
I mean, I 100% agree with document. In my experience, like, if you don't come with documentation, they will tell you, oh, we didn't find any evidence of this, right? The favorite, or not my favorite, but their favorite is, we couldn't substantiate that claim. That those words, it's just like, okay, you're basically gaslighting me. And so I agree 100%, document. I also have found that it's really helpful to get people to think of intention versus impact, right? Like, it wasn't your intent to harm me, but the impact you had was harm, right? And so it's sort of, I find that sometimes, not all the time, let's just be very honest, sometimes that helps people get out of that place of defense. It's like, yes, I know you had good intentions, but you still ended up hurting me.
Right.
So I think that that's one of those steps to take to get leaders there. But really, though, if you don't have a sort of environment of psychological safety in the workplace broadly, I don't think that any of this work can happen. And so I wonder how you think about that, and why you think it's important for managers and leaders to create that psychological safety and maintain it within the workplace.
Yeah, I actually double down in this book about the role of a manager, because yes, we may not be able to fix the whole organization, but on a micro level, if we think about the safety of our team, what are we doing? So for example, when I was in a traditional 9 to 5, most of my racialized moments happened in team meetings. Okay, so that's where the triggers were off. One of two things were happening in meetings, and maybe some of you who are watching experience this, is somebody would say something racialized, they'd say a joke or something like that, and one of two things would happen. People would laugh, and then I'd be sitting there not laughing, right? And then we move on to the next agenda item, or it's an awkward silence, and we still move on to an agenda item, right? So everybody else has moved on, but we're still sitting with that. And so a manager in that situation should be able to say, you know what, that's not the way that we handle situations here, be it in the moment or after the fact. But we're never having those kind of conversations. Everybody just goes on with their day, and then we go back to our seat playing that on a reel, again, that trauma. So I do feel like managers have a responsibility to create that safe space. So Chad and Kim or whomever are used to cutting up in meetings, we shouldn't normalize that, oh, that's just Chad being Chad. No,
Right.
you need to have a conversation with Chad and say, that's not the type of culture that we're creating here, right? And so
Right.
making them aware. And I think if we hold people accountable, I referenced something in the book that when people get it is these equity advocates or meeting advisors. And if you're let's set meeting norms, right? Let's know you can't talk over me every time, And
Right.
I think if
Absolutely.
we have certain norms for the group, for the team, then we can create that psychological safety. But you can't create the safety if you don't have the trust. And so managers have to build that trust with their employees so that they feel comfortable. And so if we have managers watching, start with the trust, start building, start getting to know your teammates and or people who work for you and with you so that they feel comfortable asking you those questions. The last thing I'll say is, because I think this adds to it, is to the defensive part of it. I teach at NYU Wagner, and one semester I thought, oh, I'm going to be so progressive. I'm going to tell all my students that when we go around the room and do intros for the first day of class, say your name, use your pronouns. Like I want you to feel like you could be yourself in this space, right? So Erica, I'm like patting myself on the back even before the class starts. I'm like, this is great.
Yeah.
So everybody goes around the room, everybody's saying their name, their pronouns. And at the end of class, one student stood back and they waited till everybody left. They approached me and they said, Professor Harts, I realized that your intention was not to cause harm by asking everyone to say their pronouns, but you actually did because maybe people don't feel comfortable doing that. And so I just want to let you know that that's not a safe space either. And I could have been like, what are you talking about? That wasn't my intention. But the fact that she felt safe enough to bring it to me and I heard her out, it made me think, wow, yeah, that wasn't my intention. And I apologize. But here's what I'm committed to do. That won't happen again. And so I'm hopeful that managers will think about that. Yes, that wasn't my intention, but it still caused harm. And the next time, my next semester on the board, I said, you know what, I don't want to cause that harm again. So what I'm going to do is put 5 things on the board. When we go around and do our bios, you pick the 3. I'll add the pronouns in there. But if you feel comfortable, I didn't go into all that context, but I wanted them to choose, but knowing that you're safe here. And I think that's the type of norms we have to create so that people do feel safe.
Right, totally. And I feel like probably that person felt more safe because of your response. And I think that's something that managers can also take away from this is that your responses create the safety, right? Like psychological safety doesn't just happen overnight. Just because we say there's psychological safety, it doesn't just happen. Every action you take, every response you give is what creates or breaks down that safety. And so definitely in your class, like you definitely created more psychological safety, a space for that person to feel safe because they already felt safe to come to you, right? Like not a lot of people would have done that if they didn't feel safe. And now you've created more safety. And so probably they felt more at home in your class and they had a better experience. And I think that goes for it goes for the workplace, right? Like if you are creating a sense of safety for people, they're going to get better work done. I mean, that's, I did a TED talk about this, but just like, if we are spending a lot of time, like wondering where the next trauma is going to come from, how we deal with the traumas we're experiencing, we are not using all of our mental capacity for work. Right. Yeah. And so if we can just like have that space to use all of our brain power, what we were hired for to get work done, I feel like things will be much better for everybody involved, including managers.
That part, right? Like,
yeah.
We just do the job we were hired to do without all that
exactly. Exactly. I mean, because I would love that. I would have loved that my whole career. Like, oh yes, I just get to do my work and I don't have to deal with like the micro and macro aggressions. Fabulous. Thank you.
Sign me up. I'll stay here forever. Give me the gold watch, right?
Like I'm here. I'm going to retire here. You mentioned in the book that companies need to rebuild trust with their employees who haven't felt safe to the point of the psychological safety we were talking about. And those who have been exposed to racial aggressions. How do companies, if they've broken that trust already, how do they get to a place of rebuilding trust?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think it's transparency. You think about all the companies last year, Erica, that said, oh, we commit to racial justice. We're writing checks. We're having all these listening tours, but yet their Black and brown employees, or those who identify in various intersections, are still feeling that harm, right? Sometimes from their own special favorite chair at home. Like nothing has changed. The About Us pages haven't changed. And so I think part of that psychological safety, be it in person or virtual, is first admitting that, you know what, we haven't done some of the things we said we were committed to do, but it's still important. We apologize, but here's what we're committed to going forward. But the whole crazy thing is, let's just pretend that nobody remembers that we said the thing, so that's enough. And that's not building trust. That's why you're seeing, I think it's one product of the Great Resignation. We realize we don't have to stay here, right? There are other places we can go. And I think those companies will be the ones that retain Black and brown women and people of color, because we see the demonstration. It's not enough to just say it. Now we want to, like we say in the community, show us the receipts, right? Show us, I can't believe anything you said, because nothing has changed since last fall or spring. And so I think that building the trust is coming back to the mic and saying, we haven't done some of the things that we've said, and we know that you've been watching, and we apologize, but here is what we're doing going forward. And I think if we just at least do the transparency, that goes a long way. I know for me, if I would have had some honesty and transparency, it might have made me stay at places. But to pretend that there's nothing to see here, it just re-traumatizes. And I think for our companies, they have to think about that trauma, just because it's not affecting you doesn't mean it's not affecting the people that keep hearing you holler out diversity, 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 or equity, 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 but we don't see it in administration.
Right. It's very interesting that you said we apologize, and my brain was immediately like, they never apologize. There's never apology, right? And so I wonder why that is, right? Like, why are companies unwilling to accept that harm was done and then apologize for that harm? Like, have you figured that one out? Because I haven't yet.
No, I haven't figured it out. But here's the reason why I felt it was so important to talk about racial trauma, because if you have somebody who's been let's say sexual harassment is an issue at a company, right? You would never tell that person who's been sexually assaulted or harassed, just go back to that manager. They didn't mean any harm. Like, you wouldn't, I don't think HR would, I mean, I know they've said it, right? I know they've said it, but they take it more serious, a little bit more serious. But when we say that we have racial aggression, no, that's not Tom. I know Tom, right? You took it a long way.
He's a good guy.
He's a good guy. I go play t-ball. My kids play t-ball with his kids, but I feel like it's this dismissal. Like, we know, yes, you're gonna get the annual sexual harassment training. We feel like it's an issue enough to at least put it on the table and require that you take it. But with racial discrimination, it's like we don't even get the privilege of you even saying that, yeah, this is a problem, and how are we going to train you so that people don't have it, right? Or don't experience that. And so I do think that apologies go a long way, even for those who've experienced sexual assault or sexual harassment in the workplace. As a person who may have experienced it, if you would have heard your HR representative say, you know what, I'm sorry that and you don't have to go back to that manager and keep getting re-traumatized, right? Or we're just gonna send that person down the hall to another team, but you still see them on the way to the bathroom. It's the same type of thing. And I think that we have to talk about these things, just like companies before would say, don't play the race card, don't make it about race. Then all of a sudden, let's talk about race, right? Now we're ready.
Yeah. It's like, we've been talking about it for a long time. Thank you for catching up.
So I think the transparency, going back to that, the transparency and the trust, the two T's, and as you said, a little therapy, it goes a long way.
I like that. The 3 T's: transparency, trust, and therapy. Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about reducing racial trauma and tools managers can use to implement, what tools can managers implement to sort of reduce the racial trauma that people are experiencing on teams? Like, are there things you can point folks to who are in the audience sort of thinking about that, how they can do this?
Yeah, so if you all definitely go to mindaharts.com, and on the site under the Right Within tab, there's some resources there for managers. But the one thing that I would say is first off, I do hone in on what managers and leaders can do, and I think that's important. But I think you also have to ask the right questions, right? I think that last year, a lot of companies were doing listening tours, but they weren't listening to make the place better. They were just checking. Right? So for a manager to sit down or virtually have a sit-down conversation and say, you know, Minda, what is your experience like as a Black woman, and what can I do to make it better? What do you need from me, right? That goes a long way. And I think we're talking past each other and not with each other and finding solutions. Like, I don't want a group of all white men and women deciding on what equity looks like for me without me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, facts. Big facts.
So that's where I sit. It's really, it's not like you don't need $50 million to solve this. It's called, let's have conversations and then use what we've talked about and make sure that we're at the table to make these changes, right? And so I think that because we aren't at many of these tables, then nothing changes, because the same people are trying to figure out, how do we, you know, just do an allyship training. This isn't something that's going to be solved in a 60-minute Zoom call, right? We have to, and I'll just put it out here, Erica, since it's a Monday night, I think we can get a little revolutionary.
I like it.
I think, and I talk about it in the book, is that I think you need to tie bonuses and salary increases to the way that managers are showing up or not showing up for their employees. And I guarantee it, if you know that your bonus is on the line, you're going to cut down on the microaggressions. You're going to create a psychological safety. And I think that, you know, we can't leave it to people's good intentions to create it. You have to implement structures, and maybe at some point we won't need them, but we've seen that we need certain boundaries. And I think that it has to be part of the evaluations, and having that 360 type of feedback, so that as someone on the team, that I can give that feedback. And you're not going to get your bonus if you didn't do it right this time. And I guarantee you fool around with folks' money, you see a change.
Oh, that's a fact. That's a fact. And it's interesting. You're like, you can't rely, you said we can't rely on their good intentions. The struggle is that they think their intentions are good. Well, not even they think, their intentions are good right now. For them, their intentions are good, right? And so that's clearly not working. It hasn't worked for the last, 50 years, 100 years, right? The good intentions of folks aren't enough. So like, we need to take next steps. Like so I'm here for the revolution. Let's do it. That's awesome. And so
you find a place where they don't hold you accountable, right? But if companies say that equity is important here, then show me, right? Prove it to me.
Right. How much money are you putting behind that, right? It's just like, there's a cost to that. And like, how much are you willing to spend on making sure there's equity? And I don't just mean money, right? It's like, what are you willing to put, what are you willing to do? I feel like when you get to that question for a lot of folks, they sort of like, I'm willing to do a diversity training once a quarter.
Yeah.
It's like, but no, that's not enough. We need to do more, because that's clearly not helping either.
At all. It's a start, but it's not how we finish.
Right, exactly. Speaking of things that can help, I'm sure there's some folks who are allies in the audience. I'm wondering what they can do, colleagues as bystanders can do when they see racial aggressions taking place in the workplace.
Yeah, this is a great thing, and tied to healing. When I was going through some of my most toxic, traumatic workplace experience due to what I believe was racial, I used to always put my emotion toward the person that was actually causing it. So in my first book, I mentioned a person named Carrie. I called her in the memo, and I bring in more stories about Carrie and Right Within. And I used to be so upset with her, but then I realized, you know what? Racism has a crew. It wasn't just her working alone. It was everyone else who did nothing and watched it happen. Those bystanders, right? And I was able to, as I was continuing on my healing journey, I had to also look at the people that did nothing and let it happen, because they were just as much at fault as the person saying the thing or doing the thing. And I think that back to good intentions theme, a lot of our allies and our colleagues will say, well, I don't do the things that Carrie does. You might as well be. You might as well be.
If you're not saying anything.
So, yeah, you might as well be. And so I would encourage all of you is to think about your bystander intervention. You don't have to be the hero, but you got to do something. And you have to normalize what it would look like. So if this situation was happening to you, what would you want someone to do for you? Would you want someone just to pretend that they didn't notice what was going on and go get another cup of coffee? Do you want somebody to do something? So for example, not too long ago, I had a woman who emailed me, and she's in senior leadership at a company that many of us have used their products. And she says, Minda, during the pandemic, I wasn't able to go to get my hair professionally done. So I was wearing my hair in protective style. I'm going to assume it was like braids or twists or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she said, at one point I felt comfortable going to the salon. So over the weekend, I went and got my hair blown out. I show up on our company Zoom call on an all staff meeting, hundreds of people. The CEO stops the meeting and hollers out, "So-and-so, I see you finally got your hair done."
Oh no.
And nobody obviously said it in that meeting. Nobody even came to her after the fact to say, wow, what the CEO did that was inappropriate. Sorry for that, blah, blah, blah. She emailed me because she's now triggered every time she logs into the Zoom call, right? And I think about that moment a lot because we've all had similar situations happen. And I think about those hundreds of people that sat there. Not even somebody could have sent her a direct message on Zoom to say, just wanted to let you know that wasn't okay. I apologize. Somebody could have gone to HR. I know the power dynamics. Sometimes we're fearful because of power dynamics, but a bystander could go to HR and say, hey, I've noticed some aggressions taking place in these staff meetings. Just wanted to document it, right? Somebody could have come to her and said, I apologize that I didn't do anything in that moment, but I want to acknowledge that it wasn't right. Somebody could have gone to CEO and said, how do you think that made so-and-so feel when you said that? Maybe you should reach out to her. None of that happened, but there's so many different ways that people could have supported her, right? And so if you're an ally or you're a bystander and you see it happening, okay, maybe you're frozen in that moment, but it's gonna happen again. So what are you going to do? Doing nothing is not an option, right? And you don't have to holler out in the Zoom, hey, Tom, don't say that to Minda. Okay, that may not be the right way.
You could.
But it could be, but it should be something, right?
Right.
What I want people to think about is if that were happening to someone you love, would you just sit there and let it happen? Or would you want someone to show up for you? So start good trouble. A friend of mine, Collins, said, start the good trouble because, you hear our bystanders, our allies, want to be allies. They'll say, well, I don't want to start any trouble. This trouble has already been started.
Right.
So get in there.
You need to help finish the trouble.
Yeah. Let's turn that bad trouble into good trouble.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, it's something I've been thinking about specifically around, colleagues showing up and making that good trouble. So a lot of folks I found are extremely conflict avoidant. And I'm sort of digging into that, on my own, just like, where does this come from? Is it cultural? Is it, because like for us, I don't know about, let me not generalize for all Black people, but I know for me, like my family, if something was happening, we're going to talk about it. Like, we're not going to just like avoid it. We're going to talk about it. And I bring that into the workplace. And I found that people are just like, really just shocked. Like, how dare you even talk about that? Like, we don't talk about those things. It's like, why don't we? And it's interesting to just think about what sort of impact our different cultural experiences could have on how we show up for each other in the workplace.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, I've only been a Black woman my whole life, so maybe it is culturally different. But I do think this, I know in my former life, I would have colleagues, they would raise all kinds of hell. If the creamer wasn't out, someone didn't change the coffee pot, like they'd come to you and like, you done something absolutely crazy. And that's like, they'll go toe to toe with you on you didn't put paper in the printer. But when it comes to this, then they don't want to start any trouble. They don't want to be involved. And it's like, okay, then for me anyway, stop calling yourself an ally because at this point, passive allyship is not helping anybody, right?
No.
And I need some people, I need a crew of people who can be champions, can be advocates, and let's normalize better workplace norms so that the people who are continuously doing the thing, because typically, and this is patterns of abuse, right? If every time I show up to work and I'm experienced and exposed to that, that's a toxic workplace. And everybody who's complicit to that is actually saying that this is okay. And if that's not the kind of culture that you want to create, then what are you going to do about it? So let's normalize that when these things happen, that we call people out, either call them in or call them out, however you feel comfortable, but let them
Mhm.
know what good could look like. And if we never
Right.
have a conversation, then the more of us that say it, not just us that look like us, but our allies too, then the people doing the harm will start to fall back, I believe, because they're going to be like, you know what, I can't say those things here anymore. You're darn right, you can't. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm recalling when I worked at Google, the amount of angst and the number of emails that were sent when they stopped stocking certain drinks in the micro kitchens. Just like people would be livid and throw big fits like on all communications platforms because they were upset about it. And I'm thinking now, like a good framing for that, for then and for now, is like, if you are not getting as mad about the racial injustice in your workplace as you are about, your favorite drink being missing, again, like you said, don't call yourself an ally for me, right? Because if you can bring that much energy for a missing soda, but you can't bring that energy for me, a human being, and the several human beings around me that are experiencing these same things, not an ally for me.
No, we don't need it.
No, we don't.
Where it was really good.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up with one last question. And it's to that quote you used, the Audre Lorde quote, I believe it was. It's like, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid. Why does that quote in particular resonate with you?
Ooh, yeah. That quote resonates with me because I think part of the paranoia that many of us have in the workplace is tied to fear, right? We don't have the conversations. We don't let people know that, no, actually, that wasn't okay to keep continuously say to me. And we're fearful because we've seen people get fired. We've seen that our experiences have been dismissed. And when you're always seeing that demonstrated, you're fearful and you're scared. And so you're like, you know what? I just won't rock the boat. I'll just keep doing this and making it work. And nothing changes for us when we don't lean into our courage just a little bit. And part of that is saying, yes, I am afraid, but it's worth it, right? I'm worth it. My mental health is worth it. Black women in particular, we have shorter life expectancies due to chronic illness related to stress-related things, which embodies racism too in the workplace. And so I realized that I love myself enough. Self-advocacy is a form of love. I've learned to love myself enough to say, you know what, I'm going to have a conversation. Part of this that I can solve of this equation is only what I say. I can't solve how they respond. But I know that if I lean into this, I benefit from letting people know what my boundaries are. And it benefits the next Black or brown woman or woman of color or person of color that enters the space. And so for me, I realized that my fear, my curiosity to see what better could look like outweighs the fear. And we can no longer, on our path to healing, be suffering in silence and immersed in this fear. That's part of the freedom that we talked about earlier. Like, I know what it feels like to be stifled. I know what it feels like to feel like I don't belong. And you know what? I'm ready to be on the other side of that coin. So I'm willing to try to see what this road looks like when I allow myself not to be afraid, because somebody benefits, not just me.
Right. I love that.
Yes. Oh, this is so good. I don't know if people know, but you could put some things in the chat if you have any questions or comments. We definitely want to address those. We have about 10 minutes left, so if you have any questions or whatever, we would love to drop those in the chat if you haven't already.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the questions. I guess, do we have any questions at present?
So if you have, I think we're waiting to see if some people have, but if you have anything else you want to talk about, we'll see if we have anything come in.
Yeah, I would, now we've been talking about racial trauma in the workplace and like how we heal from it. I'm curious if you feel like you've healed from it already, or if it's even like, like I want it to be possible. I want to be healed from it, but do you think it's actually possible?
I think that, so I'm not fully healed. I'm still healing, right? And I said it before, but I'll say it again for those who might not have heard it. For me, healing is not a one-time event. It's not a cute thing to say on Instagram. It's not a cute thing for me to say on Twitter. It's an everyday practice, right? Like my healing is important to me. So the people that I let in my life, the the jobs that I apply for, the speaking engagements that I take, like all of that is part of my healing journey. And I'm committed to that. And I can't do that alone, right? I lean on my faith. I lean on my therapist. I lean on my family. That's part of my healing toolkit. And I'm committed to healing on this side of the planet so that I can be freer when I leave this place. But so for me, it's an everyday action. It's an everyday event. But I realize that I can't just say I need to heal. I actually have to do the work, right? Healing takes work. And this is the work that benefits us. So I don't know that I'll ever see a workplace that's not racialized, but if we're all committed to doing the healing work and our colleagues are willing to make sure that there are safeguards in the workplace, I think that we'll feel more of that safety, right? You alluded to it, and you said it earlier, Erica. What would it be like to show up in a workplace where we don't have to be aggressed at every turn, that we can't just do the best work of our career because we're good at what we do, right? And I want that for us. And if we can't have it in this particular workplace, we can at least start to have it in our mind and say, this is what we deserve. Audre Lorde also said, beware of feeling you're not good enough to deserve it. You deserve a space where you can show up and be those authentic pieces of yourself and start to heal, right? But first it starts with acknowledging that you have been in pain. And I think some of us, the culture of being the strong Black woman and all these things, that we think that we can't be vulnerable in that space. So I think it starts with that. Right.
I love that phrase. Healing is an everyday practice. Like I was just literally about to write that down and save it for later.
I see something. Let's see. How do we deal with people who deny that something offensive just occurred? It's a great question. I'll chime in, but Erica, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. I think part of me, the reason why I wrote this book is because I think we are always looking for our colleagues to affirm us. And what we know to be true is when we're the onlys, or maybe a lot of us, that it's very rare that one of our colleagues who don't identify the same way as us will affirm us. And so part of that is saying, you know what, I would often question all the time, if this is racism, is it not? Am I making this up? And I was going bananas, cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, trying to figure it out. And I was waiting for someone to tell me, yeah, Minda, that is, right? And I realized we all know when the thing has happened. And so we have to affirm ourselves. So part of my healing is not looking for affirmation for somebody who will probably never give it to me anyway, right? And I think that's part of the trauma. Like, we want you so bad to say that this is a bad thing, right? And I think part of that is knowing that you will sometimes be denied, but that's not going to stop you on your path to healing, because you know what you've experienced. And I think that's half of it, because just knowing that what you experience is, and saying it, like saying it out loud, yeah, that was racism, right? Not waiting for Tom to say, Minda, that was racist. No, I can say that for myself. So even if you are denied, knowing that you've said what needed to be said, you've maybe documented it if you needed to, you've escalated the process if need be. But I just think it's part of centering ourselves, because sometimes we're never going to get that affirmation from our colleagues, and that can't stop your healing, right? So if you are denied, then you know that maybe this is not the workplace that I can thrive in much longer. And I have to strategize on what's a better environment or a different department, but give yourself that permission to at least have a conversation to say, I understand you might not have meant that, but here's how it landed on me, right? And hope that you will be met with some humanity and some dignity. But if you're not, you did your part, right? You did what you do for you. Curious what you think, Erica.
I, for a long time, I was pretty non-confrontational when these sorts of things happen. Thankfully, therapy. I am no longer that non-confrontational. So in the moment, someone's saying to me, oh, well, that thing that just happened wasn't offensive, I will tell them very clearly, like, it may not have been offensive for you, but offended me, right? You don't get to determine what's offensive to me. And I will tell you if it is offensive to me. You don't tell me what's offensive to me, because what is offensive is very personal. It is subjective, and you don't get to decide, what meets the bar for offensive. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that's the part too, because it's like, you know what? Yeah. You wouldn't, when I hear colleagues say, well, no, that's not racist. How do you know? Have you ever been have you ever experienced racism? How do
Exactly. When was the last time you were Black? You know?
So why are you telling me that that's not what it is? You don't know. So
Yeah.
this is a great question. What are your top 2 to 3 tools that you learned from therapy in order to? First of all, that's a great. I have a whole chapter on therapy in the book because it needed its own chapter. And so I think sometimes in communities of color, we haven't always been encouraged to seek out that type of help because maybe we didn't have the right education or information that would say that this is available to us as well. And one of the things that I talk about is thinking about what you need, right? So for example, when I was looking for the therapist, my first time I went to therapy was in, I think, 2007, 2008. And I didn't know what I was looking for, right? I just knew a couple of things. I knew that I wanted a woman of color as my therapist. That was important to me. And I wanted someone who focused on traumas, right? Be it, family or work, but had some specific understanding in that. And so when I was looking for the therapist, I didn't know what would work and who wouldn't, but I thought about what my needs were. And so I would encourage you to think about, what are some of your needs? If you do want to talk about racial trauma, for me, I didn't want to pay on sitting on a white person's couch to tell me what might be or might not. That wasn't the couch I wanted to sit on and pay for at that time in my life. So for me, I was really intentional about going to websites, seeing what they specialize in, are they, and I think that's really important too, because you could go to a therapist who specializes in child psychology and that may not benefit you, right? Or you may need therapy for Black girls. They're a great resource. You could take a look and they have different therapists by state and they really help you solve that. But I think the other thing too is being open. When I went for probably the first 10 sessions, I wasn't being honest with myself, right? So I needed to be honest so that my therapist, we could work in concert together, right? And I think that's part of it too, that willingness. If you're ready to heal, allowing yourself to be honest, because we talked about it at the start, being the truth tellers. They can't turn water into wine if you're not willing to help them crush the grapes. And so having that opportunity to say, I'm here to work with you. And if it doesn't work out, you don't give up on your healing path, right? Because just like you go to a restaurant, you might not have liked that restaurant, but you won't stop going to other restaurants. You'll try other things. So commit to the process. If this one isn't working for you, that you'll commit to finding that faith practice or that therapist that works for you, because you want to find that right partner. What has worked for you, Erica?
I think you said it, focusing on being honest, right? I found that I've had my greatest strides in understanding what racial traumas I've experienced in the workplace and what I wasn't willing to put up with anymore once I became very honest with myself about what I was experiencing. Because, for a long time, I was experiencing a lot and I wasn't looking at it. Like I wasn't dealing with it. I was just like sweeping it under my proverbial mental rug, if you will. And as a result, like it was hurting me from the inside, right? And so once I was able to be honest about what I had experienced, what was going on, all the various, micro, macro aggressions, outright racism that I was experiencing, then I was able to be real with myself about whether or not a workplace was right for me, what I wanted to do about it. It's a different calculus for everybody. I hear a lot of people give a lot of energy to folks online who are working at places that they don't like or agree with, right? And it's just like, that is calculus that is different for everybody, because that one terrible tech company that I won't name, but that tech company may offer the best benefits package for somebody who's got a child who has a severe, like congenital birth defect or something, and they need that healthcare, right? And so I think, therapy has helped me understand what is my personal calculus, what I'm willing to deal with, what I'm not willing to deal with, what I'm willing to leave behind in order to make sure that my mental health is okay. And I think that is the number one thing that I have taken away from therapy, a number 1, 2, and 3 about dealing with the racial traumas in the workplace is knowing what is okay for me and what isn't.
That's a word. And I think part of that is allowing ourselves to do that, because I think, especially as Black women, oftentimes we've been told, you got to do this, you got to do that. And we don't even know what it's like to find out what we want, what's good to us, right? And so allowing somebody I think once I said yes to therapy, I was able to be vulnerable in a way that I never knew I could, right? And but in a way that empowered me as well. So, you know, I know some people will say, well, therapy's not for me or whatever have you, but what I will say is there's various tools that we can have in our toolkit, and don't say that something won't work if you've never tried it.
Listen, a word. Yeah.
So, and if you don't believe, there are faith-based therapists as well. So even there are, you know, churches who have on-site therapists too. So there are different denominations if you want more of a spiritual approach or not. They are there. And so just make sure you have a team that's supporting you, because if you've been experiencing any type of racialized trauma for a year or 20 years, it's a lot in our bags. And, you know, Erica Badu said it best, pack light, because all those bags gonna get in your way. And so it's time for us to drop these trauma bags.
Yeah.
Ooh, this has been so good. I think we're at time. Thank you, Erica, for joining me in this conversation. I just am so appreciative.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed having this conversation. Really just excited about your book and hoping that it does super well. Encourage everybody in the chat to get the book, share the book on your socials, and you know, just support Minda as she's out here being a truth teller.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for spending time with us tonight. Share this out, get people hyped up online. Let's get it in our workplaces, because this is a way that we can hold them accountable. So have a great night, everybody. Tomorrow is Pub Day. I look forward to seeing you. We have in the link, you can buy the book, get it. It's on Audible. I read it myself. In case you want me to read to you, I can do that. And we have a whole week's worth of tours every night this week and next week. So join us, and we'll see you soon. Have a great, great night. And remember that you have the ability to be right within. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.